Well, good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar today. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes. I've got everybody muted, and that just cuts down on some of the background noise. We've got a large number of participants today, so if you have a question, you can use that dialog box. There's a question section there, and just throw the question in there at any point when we're going through this, and when we wrap up, I'll try to get through any questions we have and answer those for you and the entire group. And that is all the kind of housekeeping. Quick little, on background here, this is a webinar just to kind of introduce you to a new system that we have been developing with Rose Holman Ventures in the Fort Wayne Community School Systems, called SafeVisitor. Not going to spend much time here talking about my background. Everybody on the call is primarily, clients of SafeVisitor Solutions. So let's just jump into this. I wanted to kind of jump ahead and mention SafeVisitor, even though we're just getting ready to place it in Fort Wayne schools as kind of a beta test for a little while, because I know that there's a second round of school safety grants. I would imagine that most of you have probably already filed a letter of intent, but just wanted to mention this SafeVisitor because we will probably be rolling it out full steam, after we do a little beta testing at Fort Wayne, and have this ready to be implemented over the summer for school districts so that you can have it in place going into the next school year. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is there are primarily there's some hardware costs, and I'll kind of go through those at the end, that you would have to kind of get this program set up. They're really not that extensive, but with the opportunity exists to tap into these Homeland Security funds for school safety, might be a great opportunity to eliminate any cost for you rolling a program like this out. So just wanted to mention that. What do we got here? So SafeVisitor is a visitor management system. There's really three phases to this, and the first part that we're rolling out right now is really what I would call those unique or kind of one-off visitors that might come into your school or organization. These are unique. They're not volunteers. They're not contractors or vendors that come in on a routine basis. But somebody that comes in for a meeting, and you really need to make sure we're tracking, documenting, knowing who these people are, who are we allowing into our organizations, where they could potentially have some contact with not only students but also with employees. And so this first phase is really targeting those one-off visitors. So like I mentioned, we're partnering with Rose Holman University Ventures, and we've been working with Rose since about October on building this system, and it's currently in development, about 2 weeks away from probably placing it in Fort Wayne Community Schools. And at that point, we'll just kind of work through, some of the logistics of, things that we need to tighten up a little bit. But I think because they've been involved and we've been so heavily involved since the process started, that it should be a pretty smooth beta testing period. So how does it work? Well, I don't know how you're tracking visitors right now. I know I go into a lot of school districts. I have kids, so when I go into their school district, sometimes at the building level, I'm not even asked to check in, or I sign a log book that I'm attesting that I am who I say I am, and that nobody really knows who I am when I walk in there. So how SafeVisitor works is you basically, as a visitor enters the building, then they would produce a government-issued ID, like a driver's license, and if you look at your driver's license, there's a barcode on the back of it. And so the attendant, or that point of contact at that building, would just scan that barcode, and what that does is it populates all the data off that driver's license into the SafeVisitor management system. And I'm going to show you some screenshots here in a minute, and once it populates that, then you have the option of adding, data like who they're there to visit, and then Optionally, again, you can choose to run background check, and how this background check works is just a quick search of the National Sex Offender Registry, and it also is a search against an internal exclusion list. So as you roll this program out, you may have people that you would manually enter into your own exclusion list, and this could be somebody that's been problematic on school property, could be, a former employee that's not allowed back on school property after a termination or something like that. So just the ability to add people to this internal exclusion list. And once it runs that both internal exclusion list search and then it runs the National Sex Offender Registry, if there's a hit, it will auto text or email a selected group of people, and you determine who these people are. Could be security, could be administrators. That's a group that you would pre-select, and so we're going to have it set up initially. It's going to go out as an email. We're building in the option, or the ability, I'm sorry, to send that notification as a text as well. And it would also generate an alert if a person has visited more than X number of times. And again, you determine that, because if you say, hey, this person's been in here 4 times in the last 3 months, then they're starting to look more like a reoccurring visitor as opposed to this low-level kind of one-off type of visitor. There's also a panic button. I'll show you that here in just a minute. And what this panic button does on the screen for your attendant, let's say they're having some problems. Somebody, gets mad because they don't like the process. They get, disruptive, and you're needing some assistance as the attendant. There's a button there. You push that button, and it sends an alert to that pre-selected, panic group that would also get the automated alert if there was a hit. So if there's clear, and the search comes back, and this is all happening in matters of seconds, then you have the option, if you choose to take a photograph, if you want a photo issued ID, or you don't have to. And once you click on that button, you can take a photograph, and then what it does is it populates everything. You hit print, and it prints what is a self-expiring ID badge. Right now, the badges that we're kind of working with, they're black and white, and so they would have your logo on it, have the photo, the information on the visitor, who they're visiting, but then after a 12-hour period, it would say void, and there would be red lines that would go across these ID tags so that it would be clear that this ID badge is no longer valid, so they couldn't use it today and then try to get back in the building tomorrow. And then the same thing, there's a little barcode on the ID, so as they exit the building, that you could simply, scan that ID again, and it clears them out of the building. The idea there is kind of twofold. One, at the end of each kind of day, after normal business hours, the system will automatically clear everybody out. But if you have a lockdown situation, this will give you, information so you know exactly who's in the building at any given time. And so we're working on, kind of in the next phase that it will, send a notification to, that pre-selected group, administrator, security, whomever. If there is a lockdown, it will generate a report, automatically send that to them as, a text or email file, so they know exactly who's in the building at any given time if there's an emergency situation. So that's kind of the first phase. As we kind of work through and get into the second phases, the next phase is going to be really dealing with this safe vendor, and really safe vendor and safe volunteer are going to work almost mirrored and exactly alike. And these are optional. You can opt to use these, or you don't have to use these. There's no additional cost to say, we want the visitor management program, and then you say, hey, we want to use Safe Vendor and Safe Volunteer. There's no additional cost to you as a client to use this. It's the same software. So how SafeVisitor works is, because Indiana state law for school districts requires an expanded criminal history check for any employee, contractor, or vendor having direct or ongoing contact with a student. And obviously we can't do those quickly. You know, we can't do an expanded criminal history check in a matter of minutes while they're standing there. So the vendors, much like most of them do now, would enter into a contract. They would run the expanded criminal history checks. Then we could issue a hard-coded ID badge. And with this hard-coded ID badge, then as they enter and exit your buildings, they could be scanned in and out of those buildings, tracks them entering, exiting the building. It also would pop up kind of a photo of the vendor or the volunteer. It would show that they've had a certified background check and that everything is valid. So again, it's just a way of controlling access and knowing who's entering and exiting your buildings at any given point. And then all this data is stored. So you'll have, you know, legacy information here. You know, something comes up and you need to know, okay, maybe an incident happens. You need to know who was in the building, you know, 3 months ago. Administrators will be able to query and run reports to see, you know, who was logged in, when were they logged out, that type of information. So, you know, this thing would apply also to volunteers. You could dictate, you know, this is the level of screening we want with a volunteer, and the same process can work with a volunteer where they're scanning themselves in and out of the buildings. So this is kind of just a few screenshots, what it looks like. Pretty simplistic page. This page right here shows the scan visitor page. And with this page, you know, primarily you're going to see two things up here at the top. It says run background check, might be a little hard to see, your scan ID. As long as they have a government issued ID, you'll hit the scan ID button, hit that barcode on the back of the government issued ID. It populates all these fields. The only two that it doesn't populate are the person visiting or the reason for the visit, which you can add notes there. And then you can add comments. And then once that is scanned, you're going to see a list of previous visits or visit history. So that could be where the alert comes in. You know, if they're a more frequent visitor than you know, just these one-off visitors, then you might, you know, explain that they need to, you know, be, you know, scanned at a higher, or background checked at a higher level. It's also going to run those background checks through the internal exclusion list and through the National Sex Offender Registry. And then you basically hit, you know, there'll be a button over here on the left where it says allow entry, date, or deny entry, and then right below that is a take picture with the web-based camera. You just simply click, and you take the photograph, and then you're going to hit print. And once you hit print, prints out the ID badge, and they're good to go. This is kind of what the results from the background check look like. It's going to give you previous visits, you know, data from the sex offender search if there's any, you know, records, and then it would also show you, you know, any hits with the internal exclusion list. And if there are hits, or on this previous page, if you denied entry, as soon as you hit denied entry or hit that panic button in the top right corner, it's going to generate that alert to that pre-selected group of administrators or security. So the scan visitor ID to log out, they simply, you know, barcode on the, you know, the ID badge that was issued. Once they scan that, it simply logs them out of the system and logs the information. You can manage, you know, the users, the levels of access. It's kind of works in a pyramid fashion as well, meaning, you know, as you have multiple buildings, and that's one of the reasons, you know, we're rolling this out at Fort Wayne. I believe they have 52 or 58 buildings. So you can, you know, not only say, you know, this particular user has either attendant where they can scan and allow people in and out of the building, or they have administrative rights or super admin rights, and that can be done at the building level as well. So on this particular example, there's 5 different buildings, and you know, in your account as an administrator, you can look at those buildings, you can run reports for those buildings, you can control who are people with access in those buildings. You can, it says remove here, but we've been talking with Rose Holman, it'll actually be more of an inactivate as opposed to remove. So you can activate or inactivate users on your own within those building levels. And then kind of the roadmap after this second phase is complete, we'll be looking at the potential for a student check in and out. So, coming in late because of a dentist appointment, leaving early for an orthodontist appointment, where, the system could actually accommodate that. We are also looking at a what we would call kind of a semi-auto attendant or self-serve kind of kiosk. That we will not offer a full self-service kiosk simply because people could manipulate that system. They could come in with somebody else's ID and scan their way in and out of the building. And so what we'll look at for Fort Wayne after this initial phase is creating a self-service kiosk where they come in the building, they scan themselves into the building, populates the information, and then it sends it to the attendant who is sitting there close by, and then the visitor would walk over and hand them their government-issued ID. They could compare the photograph and then look at the information and then simply start the process from there. But then they would be able to scan themselves out of the building as they were exiting on their own. But some of these next steps, the early dismissal, could result in, you as potential clients, if you adopted SafeVisitor, we can have some conversations with Power School and Harmony about integrations so that that data, like, on student X, who has the authority to sign them in and out of school and those types of things. And so we would be able to look at those integrations. And then it would also allow, looking at, what is your current ID system for your current employees and, tracking that information. So if you had, an employee from building A going to building B, that they would just simply swipe as they come in and out of these buildings, and it would just log them in and out. Obviously not printing ID badge or anything like that or running any kind of background check, but it would just log that type of movement so that in the event that you ever had need to know who was in a building at any given time, that you have, that data available to you. This is all a web-based program, so what that means is, there's no software that you would have to place on your system. It would work on all your current PCs. You're not going to have to buy any new computers or PCs to make this work. The hardware that's been tested and recommended, it's all plug and play. So pretty simplistic to set up. The web camera could be anywhere from $50 to $75, depending on which one you choose. The scanner, the one that's most effective and working just blazingly fast at about a second to a second and a half to populate the information, is about $300. So that would be kind of a cost per building. So it helps to kind of understand what those initial hardware costs might look like. And then the printers. They're really looking at, and the one that's working really well is actually one of the more cost-effective printers. I think it's somewhere in the $100 range and seems to be working really well on the initial testing. So that gives you a little idea on the cost for kind of the hardware setup. The cost, you can look at an annual fee or a monthly fee. Just a lot of it's dependent upon setup, how many buildings, but we've looked at the other competitors kind of in this market, and we're probably like maybe a tenth, probably somewhere of a tenth of the cost of what a lot of these are charging for this. And so the easiest way would just be kind of to contact me directly. I can give you a quote on what the price looks like and where we think this is going to be once we roll it out. And it definitely won't be, I don't anticipate it would be any higher than kind of what I have here. There is a likelihood that if this rolls out and the process is really smooth and easy and it doesn't require a lot of technical support on our end to implement, that those costs could even be quite a bit less, and so we'll evaluate that once we kind of roll this out a little bit. But that's kind of a high-end overview of kind of what's coming in the next couple months. I'm going to pause here for a second, open up the chat box, and see if we have any questions. Great question. Is there additional charges per background search? No. It's all bundled into the price. It's an integration with the National Sex Offender Registry. Of course, the internal database is one that you would create. So no, there is no cost like you would expect, like with an expanded criminal history check for the visitor management. So the cost that we would roll out would include all of those in that quote. Let me see here. Is it $500 to $900 a month per building or per corporation? That would be a per corporation fee. Basically, we are not charging, a lot of these visitor management programs would look at your buildings as almost individual clients and charge them that fee. This would be a corporation fee. I think yes, this should work on both Mac and PCs. They're building it to work in Safari, Internet Explorer, Firefox. All the major browsers will be supported. The scanner we use now isn't always accurate when transferring information. How accurate is this one? Incredibly. And I mean, there are some much cheaper scanners on the market, and I think the scanners are one area where the cost is a little bit more, but they actually tested some cheaper models and they were getting some lag time and some delay and the information not populating very quickly. And so that one being such a critical component, because you might have several people there waiting, and information needs to be transferred quickly. So the scanner that they've been testing now for quite some time has really worked not only accurately but just very fast. Let's see. What happens if someone does not scan out? If somebody doesn't scan out, the system will automatically log them out at the end of your business day. And so some of this will be just working with your employees as you kind of roll something like this out. It's kind of a policy, just making sure that those that are attendants that are operating, scanning people in, that also keeping an eye on when people exit the building to remind them to log out of the system. But if they don't, at the end of the business day, it would automatically log people out overnight. So when you started back the next day, it would start back fresh. Can this be integrated with alarm system setting or codes? Great question. I'm going to note that. And I really can't answer that. I mean, there's so many things. What I do is I kind of roll those over to Rose Holman and the developers and ask them about ways of integrating within systems. So make a note here, and if you want to follow up with me, I'll get an answer for that and let you know. Could a limited background check be set up with this? I'm assuming you're talking about the limited criminal history. And if that's what you're doing on volunteers, then it certainly could. the issue there is we would personally not be able to run those for you because you get those free as a school district. They charge us $15 a pop for those. So, but it would absolutely work that way. What we can, even do is we could set it up to where, you could print the ID badges locally. So, if first step is to run a limited criminal history, and then after that limited criminal history is completed, then you would check a completed box in SafeVolunteer when we roll it out, and then you could print an ID badge or a key fob. We're even looking at key fobs kind of for volunteers, so that they could scan their way in. That those could be printed locally if you were using limited criminal history. So yeah. Is there a per person cost estimate for the expiring name badges, both with and without photo? The name badges, the badges themselves, there's no cost difference between if you take the photograph or don't take the photograph. And so the cost savings there, it's not any more expensive to take the photograph, I guess what I'm saying. The price range, I believe the group that they're looking at 2 or 3 different badges that do basically the same thing, and it looks like they're roughly in the black and white are probably somewhere around $30 for 250 of them is roughly what we're seeing right now, and so that gives you an idea on what those ID badges cost. Will there be a PowerPoint or a replay of this webinar? Absolutely. What I'll do is I'll put the slides up on SlideShare, and I will also I've recorded the webinar so that if you have colleagues that couldn't attend, that they could come back and watch this, and actually it's capturing all the questions as well, so they'll be able to listen to these questions too. Is the ID a label ID or an ID card? It would look like, if you've walked into, like a meeting where kind of you peel off and it just sticks to their clothing, that's the kind of ID badge that would be used for SafeVisitor. And so once it is peeled off, what it does is it activates that kind of 12-hour clock in that particular ID badge. So once they peel it off after it's been printed, placed on, their, chest, then that self-expiring kicks in, so within 12 hours then it would void out the ID badge. The SafeVolunteer, SafeVendor being credentialed at a higher level, then we could issue them a hard plastic PVC type ID like your employees probably have, because then you could certify that those are good for 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever you would certify. If someone has a criminal record besides a sex offender check, would this show up through the system? Phase 1 on the kind of one-off visitors, somebody coming into admin for a meeting, somebody dropping by to drop something off, those type of visitors that are coming in, you control the type of background check. So the one-off visitors, it's doing just an internal exclusion list, and then it's doing the sex offender registry. So these are the type of visitors that are probably entering your building every day with nothing. So the very low risk type of visitor coming into your organization. But you can dictate, on a vendor that's coming in or a volunteer, you dictate what kind of level of check that you would require for them, where it would do a much more thorough and comprehensive background check. All right, I think we have answered all the questions, and those were great questions. So again, here's my contact information. I know most of you pretty well, so if you think of things, questions that come up, don't hesitate to give me a call. Again, we'll probably roll this out or send out some information in maybe the next, 4 to 5 weeks once we've had this in Fort Wayne for a little bit and kind of had it tested. But if you come up with any other questions, feel free to call me, shoot me an email, We appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day to listen in, and we'll have this up on the website probably within the next 24 hours, and you can just go to safehiringsolutions.com. Over on the right hand it says webinars. If you click on that, there's a place for recorded webinars, and you'll be able to access this for any of your colleagues. Have a fantastic day. Thanks.